What happened in Episode 3 of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, The Long Night? Who survived the Battle of Winterfell and who didn't? And why did what happened happen? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to Deep Geek. If you want regular insight and intelligent debate about Game of Thrones and more, then click on the subscribe button in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The episode opens quietly with last-minute preparations taking place in Winterfell, and lots of pensive faces staring out over the battlements. It's as if no one quite knows what to expect. They certainly weren't expecting Melisandre to emerge out of the darkness. She didn't have an army of the Fiery Hand with her, but she did undeniably have a decisive impact on the outcome of the battle, which perhaps should have given us a clue straight away that this was not an ordinary battle. Some more soldiers on the side of the living would not have made a difference. All that really mattered were the actions of a small number of people later on in the battle. The battle outside was just buying everyone time. We'll come back to Melisandre later in the video, but what she does first, giving the Dothraki flaming arrax, certainly looked good and probably had a short-term impact, but ultimately it was more about buying some trust so that she could gain entry into Winterfell. It was Davos who ordered the gates open for her, something he surely would not have done if she hadn't looked like she was being useful. He wanted her dead, and we were reminded of her crimes just last episode with the inclusion of that girl who looked a lot like Shireen, and Arya and Gendry's banter about his kidnapping. Anyway, the standoff between the two armies is ended when the Dothraki charge and the trebuchets start firing their fiery boulders. It didn't last long, but charging really was the only thing to do with the Dothraki. They are an offensive force and no good at just standing there waiting for the enemy to attack them. But they get wiped out. This slaughter is largely just a prelude to the battle to come, but there are two big takeaway points from this charge. First, we should note that the Dothraki are largely gone now. If you remember, Dany took pretty much the entire nation, or the men at least, thousands of miles from home for this, and now they are dead. The second point about the Dothraki charge is that this was the moment that the living abandoned the plans that had been so carefully worked out last episode. Jon and Dany were supposed to wait for the Night King before taking to the air so that they could ambush him, but Dany, seemingly affected by what had happened to the Dothraki, they were all her blood riders after all, abandons that plan almost straight away. It's understandable and has echoes of Jon's own charge into battle at the previous Battle of Winterfell. Remember when Ramsay released Rickon and Jon just charged in to try to save him, abandoning their battle plans. But it also meant that instead of Jon and Dany ambushing the Night King, he could ambush them. While I think of it, Ghost was part of that Dothraki charge as well. It was the only thing we saw of him this episode, but the fact that he didn't reappear as a White certainly suggests that he survived, so perhaps there will be more from him later in the season. Although I feel like I've said that for both of the last two episodes. The battle that follows is, as we suspected, quite low on tactical nuance. The tactics used by the Army of the Dead aren't hard to follow. The mass of Whites basically just charges at the opposition and keeps going, clambering over any dead bodies, while the White Walkers slowly advance behind them. And one by one, Winterfell's defences fall. The Dothraki charge fails, the fiery ditch fails, some Whites just lie down on it and the rest charge over, the walls fail. The Whites clamber over each other to get up there. The gates fail because the White Walkers had brought a white giant with them, and so on. The one weapon the defenders did have, which was undoubtedly effective, the dragons, is rendered a lot less effective by the Night King bringing the storm, mists and snow and howling winds. The dragons are buffeted around by it, visibility is reduced, and they can't risk just blindly firing onto the ground lest they kill their own people. So, on the ground, the battle is largely one long retreat for the living. It is bloody and confusing and horrific, and deliberately so. A Song of Ice and Fire has shown time and again that war is not glamorous, it is horrible and it is random, and the showrunners have in the most part translated that across to the screen. Some people die through sheer bad luck. Others survive because someone else happened to be close enough to save them. So the battle we see here is not heroic, although that isn't to say that there isn't heroism to be seen. I was reminded of the exchange between Bran and his father Ned way back in Season 1, when Bran asks how you can be brave when you are afraid, and Ned replied that that is the only time you can be brave. There are a lot of frightened people in this episode, understandably. You see it on so many faces: Sam, Tyrion, Sansa, the Hound, even Arya. And yet there is a lot of bravery. And there are hefty doses of heroism too. Ed died after saving Sam. Beric later after saving Arya. Lyanna Mormont died charging at and killing the White Giant, a Mormont to the last. And Jorah, of course, after saving Daenerys. It's how he would have wanted to go. As a passing note, this is all of the Mormonts we know about in the show now dead. Jaor, Mage, Jorah and Lyanna. R.I.P. House Mormont, your flame burned brightly. At this point, let's check into the crypts, because we have to say that, contrary to many expectations, they probably were the safest place at the end of the day. The Night King raised the Stark dead from their tombs, to be sure, but it was pretty late in the day, and most of those in the crypts survive. It was certainly safer than being above ground. But probably more important to the story going forward was the conversation between Tyrion and Sansa. After her rather withering dismissal of him in episode 1, she now seemingly softens a bit by reassuring Tyrion that he was the best of her husbands. It's quite a low bar, but the fact that they brought up again the reality of their marriage is notable. I think this will come up again. They are two of the most politically minded characters left, so their thoughts on what happens next are important. Tyrion goes as far as suggesting that they should perhaps have stayed married, and she responds not by saying that they wouldn't have been a good married couple, but by saying that it wouldn't have worked because of his divided loyalties between her and Daenerys. Even in the midst of the battle, this is teeing up some big issues for the second half of the season. We've seen plenty of times already this season and last how Tyrion and others are not always 100% sold on Dany as ruler. Sansa wants independence for the north. Sam thinks Jon would be a better monarch. Varys and Tyrion both see Dany's weaknesses and think rather self-importantly that she would be a good queen because she will have them advising her. All of these tensions have been put on hold for an episode, but they will be central to what happens in the last 3 episodes. But let's return to above ground, where things are starting to get completely chaotic. Jon and Daenerys get separated on their dragons, and the Night King, understandably, decides to attack Jon on Rhaegal. And Viserion and Rhaegal get locked in combat. Drogon comes in and saves Rhaegal, knocking the Night King to the ground, but Rhaegal is clearly wounded and takes no further part in the battle. It looks from the trailer for the next episode that he survived, though. As far as this battle is concerned, the main thing is that Jon is now on foot, so he's unable to get to Bran in time for the climax of the battle. And the Night King being grounded also allows Dany a last-gasp attempt at Plan A, roasting the Night King with dragonfire. That obviously didn't work. The plan was never going to work. The people who did seem to have an inkling about what to do, Bran and Melisandre, weren't in the mood for telling anyone. The Night King, however, does manage to get another one of his epic javelin throws off and injures Drogon. That and being swarmed by whites when he lands makes sure that he also can't affect the action for the rest of the episode. The Night King raises all those who have fallen, including poor Ed and Lyanna Mormont, and Viserion stands guard, or more accurately flails about a bit on the ground, preventing Jon from getting to the Godswood. Which means that it's just the Night King and Bran left, or so he thinks. Because we should give Theon some credit at this point. He did a sterling job defending Bran in the Godswood from all the whites, while Bran just sat there relaxed, wogging into some ravens to check out what's going on elsewhere in the battle. Theon's story is probably the strongest example we have in the show of a classic redemption arc. He did terrible things, sunk to absolute depths, not wanting to face up to who he was or what he had done. But over the last 3 seasons he has slowly hauled himself back up, playing his part in Sansa and his escape from Ramsay Bolton, rescuing Yara, and ultimately now giving his life to save Winterfell and Bran. The few seconds he earned through his mad charge at the Night King were actually crucial. Bran thanking him and telling him that he is a good man are the moment when Theon finally reached his redemption. He gave his life as a man at peace with himself. But now let's talk about Arya. I know that many will be surprised or disappointed that it was her who finally killed the Night King, that Jon didn't get his hero's moment and so on, but taken purely within the context of the show, this actually does all tie together for Arya. There are so many moments in her journey that led her to this moment. When they were children, Jon taught her to stick 'em with the pointy end, and that's exactly what she did. So Jon, the character many had thought to be the prince that was promised and fated to face off against the Night King, literally taught her what to do. The Hound saved her partway through the battle, repaying her faith in him as fighting for something more than himself. Beric died saving her. He and Melisandre both said that he had been brought back from the dead repeatedly for a reason, and this was it. Saving Arya's life so that she could go on and kill the Night King. It was an easily overlooked moment, but it was important. The words that Melisandre used to get Arya to go and kill the Night King were the words Syrio Forel had taught her right at the start of her journey. What do we say to the god of death? Not today. And Melisandre was right seasons ago when she said that she and Arya would meet again. And then there's the skills that Arya learned from the Faceless Men, which were what kept her alive when she moved through Winterfell, and obviously what got her close enough to the Night King to kill him. The move she pulls, dropping the dagger, catching it in the other hand and using it in a lower position, was a move she used last season when sparring with Brienne. And the weapon she used, the cat's paws dagger, was given to her by Bran, the person whose life she was saving right there and then, and he gave it to her in that very spot in front of the weirwood tree. We might have preferred it to happen in another way or be done by someone else, but there's no denying that the showrunners have been building for this for quite some time. And as for how to kill the Night King, it might have seemed anticlimactic just stabbing him, but I think that was part of the point. It was something very simple after such a massive build-up. A simple moment after so much thought and debate, and the clue is in the language that the showrunners used to describe what happened. This wasn't a matter of killing the Night King, they said. It was a matter of uncreating him. And for that, you needed a couple of things, it would seem. He was created in front of a weirwood tree with a dragonglass dagger thrust into his heart. He was uncreated in front of a weirwood tree with a Valyrian steel dagger thrust into his heart in the same way. This was not a matter of killing a living creature by stopping the flow of blood to his brain or anything like that. It was a magical undoing. The magic of the Valyrian steel blade undoing the magic of the dragonglass blade. There was perhaps some symbolic meaning then in that blade, the cat's paws dagger, one end of which was dragonglass and the other Valyrian steel. Arya had a habit, if you remember, of flipping them around. We might have thought of them as interchangeable, but they were opposites. So it was Arya, ultimately, who killed the Night King and saved humanity, not some prince that was promised, or Azor Ahai figure wielding a fiery sword, not Jon, not Daenerys, not Bran in the astral plane, but Arya, the woman whose entire story arc has been about death, and bringing death to all men. She killed the embodiment of death. All the prophecies and visions and heroes' journeys may have guided people to this place, but they weren't ultimately true, per se. It was just that the belief in them drove the plot on. This was not what most people expected, but it makes complete sense in the show world at least, looking back on Arya's story arc. That's good storytelling in my book. None of which is to say that this is what will happen in the books. In fact, I feel sure it will be very different. George R.R. Martin has woven a lot more complex a tapestry of story arcs and thematic hints there, but I think even there the denouement won't turn out exactly as we are expecting. But that's a big enough subject to warrant a video on its own. The result of the Night King being uncreated was exactly as we were told it would be. The other White Walkers shattered and the Whites collapsed. As a side note, Viserion collapses rather than shatters. The technical debate over whether he was a White Walker dragon or a White dragon seems to be over. And the army of the dead shatter and collapse at the most crucial moment in the battle, just as the castle and the crypts are being overwhelmed. Another few minutes or seconds, and those fighting in the courtyard or trying to escape from the crypts would have been dead. And to end it all, Melisandre walks off into the snow, removes her necklace, and collapses. Her story is now done. Hers was undeniably one of the most intriguing characters. She did have a role, a very important role, in defeating the army of the dead, but she was still wrong about so very much, and still did horrific things to further her own agenda. When she walked off, collapsed and died, we are left like Davos watching, not really sure how to feel. She has no place in what comes next. Her role was always only ever to do with opposing the Night King, and without her humanity probably would not have prevailed. But was it right that she never faced true justice for her crimes? She was necessary for life to prevail, but did evil things to get there. She was wrong about so very much, but right at the most important moment. We're not given easy moral answers in Game of Thrones. We're left to decide for ourselves. I like that. So, what next? The roll call of the dead is long, if not crippling. Ed, Beric, Lyanna Mormont, Ser Jorah, several thousand Dothraki and Unsullied, Melisandre, Theon, Viserion again, and of course the Night King. With that great threat out of the way, it may seem that the rest of the season will be a bit anticlimactic, but this is probably how George R.R. Martin will play it in the books as well. He has often talked of the feeling of the ending being like the scouring of the Shire in The Lord of the Rings. After the big evil has been vanquished, a second evil must be confronted by our broken heroes before the land can return to peace. There is a lot more to come from Game of Thrones. Please join me on Thursdays and Sundays all through the season, where I'll be discussing all the points raised in this episode with special guests and making predictions about future episodes. If you'd like to see more of my Game of Thrones Season 8 videos, please click on this link on the left of the screen. Or if you'd like to support the channel or get some exclusive content or priority access on my live streams, please click on the link to my Patreon page on the right of the screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.